Team, welcome back to another episode of Ask Top. I'm your host, Command Sergeant Major Retired Mark Gerecht, and today we have a panel of subject matter experts, family and friend members, and the team. We got Hurricane, Mark Halliburton, Hurricane. We got Master Sergeant Oz Green. He's the wizard behind the curtains. And then we got retired Command Sergeant Major Garrick Griffin. I think he rolls with the tide. But today you should have watched or probably seen our previous episode on defining racism within the military. And today, part two, we're going to discuss racism and its impact on our soldiers and the Army as a whole. So before we get started, team, you guys got anything you want to share, put out there? Come on, Mark. I see you itching, Mark.
No.
Come on.
I'm excited to be here. Touch those uncharted territories and talk about those uncomfortable things to make them comfortable. I'm ready to get in it this morning.
Oz, how about you?
Hey, I'm just excited to be here, ready to get this conversation going. It's going to be a good one.
All right, Griff.
Hey, Mark, I'm looking forward to picking up right where we left off in the last session that we had. So, like Mark said, I'm just glad to be here and I'm ready to go.
Okay, let's go ahead and get into question number one. Have you experienced racism in the military? How did you handle it? And did the military take appropriate action? Who's first in the batter's box?
I'm going to open this one. There's many accounts where I've experienced racism in the military. And I will rewind back to, my first unit of assignment. It was extreme. I graduated basic training and, being from where I'm from, heading across the big pond called the Atlantic Ocean to Germany, and being one of 5 or 6 African Americans in my unit in a 200 plus company. At the time was the largest military police company in the United States Army, 529th MP Company. And so when I get there, I show up and, I get meted at the reception center right there in Heidelberg, Germany. And I go down to my organization and realize I was like, oh my goodness, this is not like basic training. It's 5 of us and 3 of them wasn't MPs. And so it was 2 MPs, they're African American. Fast forward about a month, the drinking age in Germany, of course, is 18. So we leave the nightclub and we come back to my bedroom. I think it's actually
14 for local national. Just saying. 14.
Yeah. This guy. And so, I go back to my barracks room and there's a sign, those whiteboards that's normally on barracks door. And, what was there was a tree with a person hanging from it, and PFC Halliburton name was on the tree. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I look at my roommate, I'm scared to go in my room, so of course, I become flustered and scared. And so I immediately, notify staff duty, who calls the first sergeant at the time. And, at the time I felt that the first sergeant, which later proved to be true, I thought he was probably borderline racist. I did initially. And I was hesitant to call him or talk to him. But nonetheless, the battalion sergeant major, battalion commander, first sergeant company commander, all sat down with me the following morning to discuss, what I seen and what was there. And of course, the graphic images and the words that were sitting there, words effective, you should be used to this, where you come from, this is nothing new, things of that nature.
What? Wait a minute. That's what they said to you?
Yes.
That you should be used to this?
Yes, that's what they said to me. And I'm an 18-year-old kid at the time, 18 years old. So I didn't know what to do. So I was afraid, I had a one-on-one with the IG and, EO and all these people, these service support systems that were designed to kind of help get after things like that.
What did they have? What did the IG and the EO have to say?
Well, they explained the 15-6 process that they were going to investigate this and to see exactly what happened. They're going to bring in, some investigators to kind of see who, what. Come to find out, they never found the perpetrator. They had suspicions of who did it. No one, of course, in a law enforcement organization, we have this don't snitch culture, but in a law organization, it's at a whole new level. You do not snitch, or that it is a serious code that we live by. Well, and you don't talk about it. And so I don't care what happens. And so what ended up happening, the battalion commander at the time brought me in to explain, what the findings were. They couldn't find nothing substantiated. They couldn't find any evidence to prove that this happened or who did this. And I said to myself, I'm like, so this is my next, career. This is what's supposed to happen. And had thoughts of, just exiting the Army. Unfortunately, MP Corps still to this day has a 5-year enlistment contract. So I still have another 4 years left to continue this. And so I'm in Germany, away from my family, no support systems, no nothing. And, in an organization where I'm the minority, literally. And so what I did was, I sat there and tried to find friends outside the organization and try other support systems and things of that nature. And then to find out that I end up, moving forward, and then switching platoons and going over and working somewhere else to kind of get out of the kill zone, for lack of a better term. But that was probably the most, horrific and horrifying experience I still have to this day in my entire career, that I will never forget about. But, what bothers me is that the approach, in my opinion, at the time that the Army took, that being my unit leadership at the time, to me, if that happened today, you would have, I believe the suspect would have been found, the person who did it. I believe I know who did it. But to me, it was like, well, it's not that big of a deal. It is what it is. And it scarred me. It scarred me to the point where, I will never forget about it. But what I ask myself is, how do we prevent this from happening again? And there's many answers to how to prevent this happening again. But the point is, it shouldn't happen in the first place.
But
that's my experience.
But your first sergeant, your company commander, these guys you should be used to it. It's not a big deal. It was to the point where, I think that the unit at the time was afraid, because, they were afraid of, this growing legs and expanding and becoming a huge problem. And when you're 18 years old, you're very impressionable. Absolutely.
People can tell you things and say things to you, especially when you don't have a support system behind you, kind of giving you alternate ways of looking at things. But when you're in that position and they use the way you were brought up against you in order to minimize the impacts of this grown legs. And that's what I feel, fast forward, me growing up, that's what happened, because the sad thing about it is it's true. I was used to it. I wouldn't, but the fact that it is happening in a foreign country on foreign soil in a unit where I'm literally the minority.
With your brothers and sisters in arms to your left and right. And one of them is doing it too.
Exactly. It was an experience that I will never forget. You think that, you served in basic combat training, you learn this code of ethics that you have and how each other is supposed to be treated, and you're given this new understanding of equality that you didn't have prior to putting on the uniform. And now that you have this this understanding of code of ethics and dignity and respect, and then you get to your first unit of assignment and you're asking yourself, is this huh? It was bad. And that's what really bothered me, because now I ask, did my roommate do this? Who did this? Now everyone, I don't trust anyone, because, you know, I don't know who is at fault or who would put themselves in a position to do this. It was bad. It's to this day. And, you know, and I tell this story numerous of times, and, you know I probably told Gigi before and Oz, but that story really scarred me. It did.
As it should have. Hell, it would have rattled me. Wow. Oz, what are your thoughts?
Let's let Griff go first because he's on a time.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Griff.
And I can get to that one too. I don't want us to rush through this, but I would tell you that, and I'm glad to say, in my 30 years in my military career, the only time that I ever felt that racism might exist within the military for me, and I'm just speaking for me because of my experience, and we talked about it in the green room, was a situation when I was a drill sergeant. And again, I have to realize that at that point, the person that really initiated the situation that put my life and my military career and my family in jeopardy was a new soldier coming into the military that we are trying to indoctrinate and trying to get him to come into our culture. You know, as a drill sergeant, I'm sitting out in front of the formation and I'm correcting soldiers. And I had this one soldier, he walks in front of me in the formation. And I corrected him. And, you know, it's funny how I got picked up because, you know, former drill sergeants, you know, you go into the barracks, we have a leadership wall. The leadership wall has all everybody, all the cadre in the organization. And so this drill sergeant from another company brought these two soldiers over to our company and act like he was going into the back to talk to the drill sergeants, but left the two soldiers in front of the leadership board. And I literally got picked out of a lineup. You know, almost like, you know, at a police station getting picked in the lineup. I got picked in the lineup of this person that put their hands on this soldier. And long story short, a 15-6 was initiated on me. And I'm sitting up there. When you're going through the process, you know, first of all, you feel like everybody abandoned you. You start to question yourself, did you really do it? And I'm sitting up there saying to myself, of all the things I've done as a drill sergeant, the one thing I know I've never done is put my hands on a soldier. Because my first sergeant had a 3-step. We almost could do anything we wanted to when I was a drill sergeant, with the exception of put your hands on a soldier. First sergeant had a 3-step rule. If you was within 3 steps, that means you violating that soldier's space. And whatever happens at that point, you're on your own drill sergeant. So in my mind, I know that I didn't test this soldier, but I'm sitting there, I'm questioning it. Everybody in the organization and abandoned me, with the exception of my commander and my first. So unlike Mark, I did actually have a good commander and first sergeant and my sergeant major. But when you're going through that process, it's the worst feeling in the world. And long story short, it's because that soldier, he comes from a background where there's no black people. And if it was some black people, they weren't in charge of nothing. And he was taught that a person that don't look like him can't tell him what to do. And so I had to go through this whole process of worrying about whether I'm about to lose my rank, lose my chance to teach, coach, and mentor America's future leaders because of one person had these thoughts and these beliefs. Long story short, I made 30 years in the military. That means I was a sufferer. That means I got past that particular point. But it's not the best feeling. Now, Mark says something. Now, I have had a situation where I was pulled over. This is before people was even talking about racial profiling. And I remember like it was yesterday, I just got my first car, driving from Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri to Birmingham. I hit the city of Birmingham, my great state of Alabama, and lo and behold, I get pulled over. And what the officer told me was well, hey, you know, you got out-of-state tags and people that fit your description have been shooting people, shooting at police. And I'm sitting up there. This is before racial profiling was big. I'm like, what are you talking about? People, what is that description you talking about? Long story short, when he ran my stuff and found out I was in the military, he came back and said, hey, you know, it's just a misunderstanding, but I know you understand. You're in the military, blase, blase, and all this other stuff. And I mean, you talking about feeling lower than low and felt like I had been violated. Man, I was like, I was basically afraid to even drive long distances for a while because of that particular situation. When I got back to Fort Leonard Wood, From that point on, if I went home, I flew. I refused to drive long distances by myself because of stuff like that happened. Because along that trip from Fort Leonard Wood to Birmingham, I got pulled over 3 times. Ask me how many tickets I got.
No.
Not one. And all of it was because of who I looked like. First of all, because I was young and I shouldn't have had a car like that. Now, I must have been a drug dealer or something. And they harassed me, and they was looking for, it looked like they was trying to urge me to do something so they could have a reason. But I was raised by a mom that, had to give me that conversation a long time ago. People talk about it, but in the Black community, we have to give our kids that conversation every day when they leave that house. Unfortunately, in this world, when you get pulled over, these are the actions that you need to take when you go out there. And still now, and I think it's one of our questions, still now, even when the kids do what they told to do, they still end up getting shot.
Well, you brought that up in our last conversation, and the only thing I can share with you is that exact same conversation your mom had with you, I've had several times with my daughter. But just out of, hey, you do understand that cop's in control. You do understand that anything that you do is going to be wrong. You just shut up and color. If he's done something wrong, you deal with it after the fact. But that was not from the perspective of what you're talking about.
Your perspective, Mark, is I just want you to act like an adult.
Yeah.
Don't be disrespectful. And my perspective is I want you to live.
Yes.
That's the perspective.
I mean, we're having the same conversation with our kids.
Yours is just so you can be respectful. Mine is so that
mine's so you don't get thrown in jail and you don't get shot or something because you're stupid. Not because, hey, I just happen to be of a persuasion that I am more likely to be stopped and more likely to be shot. That's terrifying, man. I could not imagine having to have that conversation with my child for those reasons. Griff, you got anything else there?
No.
So your chain of command appeared to take the right approach.
I think, like we talked earlier, you had those chain of commands that the first message that they hear or whatever, they just go with it. They don't look for the second and third order effects, or they don't realize that it's 3 sides to every story. And that was a learning process for me as well. It actually helped me. That situation helped me as I continue to progress through my military career, as that every time something happens with a soldier, I need to make sure that I look at all sides and not just the first thing that's brought to me. That's what I'm running with. Because a lot of times, as I have learned, the first bit of information is not the most accurate bit of information. And when you start peeling the onion back and you start digging a little deeper, you find out that there's a lot more to the story than what has been presented to you. And then remember that, yes, you do have you have a person a victim, but you also have a suspect, but both of them have rights.
And need to be treated. Both of them need to be treated equally.
Exactly.
Wow. All right, Oz, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. Oh, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, if it was not for Oz, you'd be seeing a presentation like you did last week, which was me having a radio show with no pictures. Oz is the wizard.
So my experience with racism in the military has been very, very minimal. And I believe that my experience has been very minimal is because of gentlemen like you. The things that I've saw, they haven't been as flamboyant. It's been discreet. For example, I came up in combat arms units, and of course, I'm the minority. and in these combat arms units, like, we would be there, and it would be small little things like there would be like a platoon meeting to discuss information that was going to be put out for the next day's mission. And I would just be not invited. Or, there would be these little secret meeting places, and I'm a squad leader at the time, so I need the information just like everybody else.
So this was like a platoon
It got
meeting?
to the point. Yes. So it got to the point where once I realized that they were like just leaving me out of these meetings and stuff, I just stopped trying. I was like, you know what? Don't care. I'm going to show up. When I show up, I'll get there when I get there. I'm not going to sit here and, chase these jokers around and, get upset and be worried about a lot of this stuff, because like at the end of the day, eventually it's going to get to the point where they're going to start asking questions and I'm going to start giving them answers. But nobody ever asked questions. I guess they just didn't want to have the conversation. And I would ask them, like, why do y'all have these meetings and I'm never invited? Oh, we just forget, or this, that, and the third. I'm like, dude, we're in a bee hut. There's 6 rooms in a bee hut. How do you remember to invite 5 rooms and just forget to invite the last one? So, like I said, my experience has been very minimal inside of the military. Outside is completely different, but I believe that my experiences were minimal because of you gentlemen.
Wow. We, in the green room, we did a little bit of talking about one of my situations in which I basically had a minority individual incite a mutiny in my unit. And it was all proven to be the fact that he did this, and it was racially motivated. And the only thing I can share with you about that is my chain of command assumed everything they were told was 100% accurate, and I was going to be relieved that day. And if it wasn't for some of the actions I took, I would have been relieved. And they chose to do the 15-6. It took several months. It came back that I hadn't done any of these things. And all of my soldiers, in fact, the IG said it was probably the strangest 15-6 they ever did, in that all of the first sergeant soldiers stood up for him, and to include the ones that he had recommended Article 15s on. That made me feel really good. But the fact that my chain of command bought into all that without even sitting me down. But I know how it made me feel that I was the victim of racism in that event. And as I've shared with you, it's happened to me 4 times in my career. But I could not imagine living with it the way that minorities have had to live with it, the way you explain it to me. Because I think the emotions are all the same for us. We feel the same emotions and the same anxieties over it. Griff, I was going to lose, my livelihood for my family, lose my career. It was over. And, I get relieved as a first sergeant. I'm done. I'm not getting promoted again. But as I said, the gunnery sergeant I went to Diomi with was the guy or Master Guns. He was the one that made it real for me when he said, happened to you 4 times. How'd that make you feel? How would it make you feel if you had to deal with that a couple times a month, 6, 8 times a quarter, 12 times a year? That really made me look at it totally different. And from listening to you guys, I see that we both had the same experiences to some degree. Some chains of command just buy into the first spot report. Other ones say, hey, let's back up and get the facts. But, it seriously bothers me to my core, Hurricane, what you tell me about the chain of command saying, well, you should be used to that. That's like telling me I should be used to abuse. I should be used to hazing. I should be used to sexual harassment if I'm a female.
Or male.
Yeah.
I mean, it go both ways. I would tell you that I think that's another reason why I stayed around for 30 years. I'm just going to be honest, because it definitely wasn't because of the money, because I've been offered a whole bunch of money to do a whole bunch of things. But the reason why I know for a fact, me personally, as I continue to look back on it, why everybody keep on asking me, why you stayed 30 years? It was because of the people. And I want to ensure that everybody, regardless of race, color, creed, got treated equally. And as I progressed in my military career, I knew I had a little bit more influence on it than I did when I was Private Griffin. I didn't have as much influence. But as First Sergeant and Sergeant Major Griffin on different levels, I have a whole bunch of impact.
Absolutely.
To that that people get taken care of. And at the same time, when I'm doing it, what am I also doing? We talked about that. I'm mentoring and teaching other people the right way. I'm not making excuses for the people that did what they did to Mark, but I would venture to say if I was a fly on the wall back when they was growing up in the military, they said to Mark what they heard people above them say to them when they was young soldiers. They was repeating something. But what I also say is just because you learn something from somebody don't mean it has to be your belief. It don't have to be your thought. I put some on Facebook the other day that talked about perspectives and talked about a guy, his father was an alcoholic. He became an alcoholic, or he had two sons. One son became an alcoholic, and his excuse was he became an alcoholic because his dad was an alcoholic. He had another son, and people asked him, well, why wasn't he an alcoholic? And he said he wasn't an alcoholic because his dad was an alcoholic. It's all about perspective. At some point, we have to know, and you have to know that just because what somebody said or did does not make it right. And when you know better, you do better. During that time when Mark came in, it was in the early 90s. I already know what some of the concepts. I mean, like I said, when I came in, my first platoon sergeant was a Vietnam vet. So that mindset and some of that stuff was completely different than the mindset of people that we have in the military today. And I think Oz hit it on the head when he said, he hadn't had to be exposed to it as much because we became a little bit smarter in the military. And we started to, that's what all the EO and stuff, the practices, and you going to DOME and stuff like that, people, it started to get better. But it ain't always been that way. It has not. And so I'm glad to hear the fact that you hadn't had to be exposed to it as much. That in itself, for me, it does me good to know that my 30 years weren't in vain.
But, as leaders, one of the biggest responsibilities, in my opinion, that we have, we talk about as an NCO, our responsibilities are, the health and welfare of our soldiers and the accomplishment of the mission. How do we justify allowing someone to be mistreated, whether it's race, whether it's sexism, how do we justify that in our minds as a leader? I don't, I can make them, now don't get me wrong. I could look at a situation and through lack of experience as a leader, not make a good decision. Yeah. And hopefully somebody over me with a little bit more experience and wisdom goes, come here, you little knucklehead. Do you understand what you did, what you failed to do, and why this is important? That leadership has got to be there because that's what holds us together as a team.
I just think all leaders are not built equally, though. I mean, at the end of the day, they not. And just like you said with the NCO creed, how many people really, a lot of people, especially leaders, they learn it just for what? A promotion board or something like that. They go through a school, but how many of them do they really live it? And then to say that, it'll help them. Well, you know what? The Constitution has said that all of us, we had equal rights too. But people pick and choose on what part of the Constitution applies to them and when it applies to other people. Not trying to go back to slavery or nothing like that, but just think about it. That document was created so that everybody was treated equally. The same thing with that flag. When people get upset about that flag, that flag, it might mean something. I'm a 30-year veteran, and I appreciate the flag, but I also appreciate the fact that I serve so people have the right to protest whether or not they want to do that flag or they don't want to do the flag. I serve so people can do that. But we have people that pick and choose to say, hey, well, that's not the right way to protest. Then what is the right way to protest? We can't pick and choose.
You brought up a good point that is a segue to our next question. And this comes from Hurricane. When we were putting our questions together, he sent me this question and it really hit home for me. How do African-American soldiers deal with feeling like a sellout while supporting the Constitution? Griff?
It's, when you look at the media, and I'm not gonna say the names, but I did see a few people that soldiers out there doing what it is they've been charged to do, to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, both foreign and domestic. during these recent protests, and we got people spitting in our face and stuff like that, and then now you got soldiers. They starting to question: Do I have the right to have feelings right now? And for some leaders did not take that into consideration, that these soldiers are also human beings, and they are also American citizens as well, and they dealing with this thing the exact same way that people that don't wear the uniform is dealing with it. But we have been taught that we have to be silent, we have to be apolitical. Being apolitical don't mean that you can't talk about it though, and I think that's what some leaders failed here this past year when it came as the situations escalated, especially after Mr. Floyd's death, and it got really truly escalated. And some people, you know, they
let me interrupt for a second. It wasn't his death, man. It was his murder.
Oh, his murder. Mark, I appreciate you for correcting me on that. His murder. But you know, you had leaders that didn't want to talk about it. They just want the soldiers, as how we say, just suck it up and drive on, keep on moving. They don't have anything to do with us. And unfortunately, I think those leaders that did that, they missed the mark. Well, and they, you know why they soldiers don't, you know, they having problems with their soldiers.
The key word in that question that got me when I read it from Mark was sellout. Mark, can you talk to me about that?
You know, there's a couple things. Griff, you open up a can. You know, you will not perform open heart surgery. If a soldier got shot, you know, in combat and he had a chest wound, you wouldn't perform the surgery on the spot because the conditions don't allow you to perform those life-saving measures. He will be rushed, or she will be rushed to an area or a level 3 facility that's conducive for that soldier to be fixed. The problem is the trauma that some soldiers who suffer in the environment is because people refuse to create the conditions to treat the trauma. You know, racism is traumatic. These experiences traumatic, and if we say, well, we can't do that because we refuse to create the conditions to deal with the trauma that these soldiers are dealing with. The problem is we have the personnel. You have doctors and nurses and medics within your formation, but you don't have the conditions. What's preventing us from creating the conditions to treat these issues? Because we're scared of it. You know, we don't want to treat it. We'd rather just, well, let's just send you here and let that, you know, you treat this issue here. That's problem number one. You get the word sellout is because of, you know, based on where you come from, you know, we have these certain codes and cultural values and norms that we've grown accustomed to, that we're grown up with because of what we believe. And, you know, there's this line, you know, it's being a black law enforcement officer is almost like 2 strikes in the military. You know, being in the military is strike. Being a black law enforcement officer in the military is strike 2. It's twice as hard. Because now, not only are you wearing a uniform that people that you come from look at you, it's like, man, what you doing, man? You know, and then having the ability or authority to perform law enforcement just multiplies and intensifies the scrutiny that you receive. And then being a minority in an MOS, that you're a minority already in society. It is almost mind-boggling that you even to this day that I look around at the mid-level, senior NCO rim, it's more, you know, the ratio and the percentages of African Americans that thrive at the senior levels in my regiment is even more skewed. And so now you say, people ask you, well, how did you get to that position without selling out? You know, you had to sell out, because if you didn't, it would be more of those who look like you in those positions, but it's not. So you must be a sellout. And now you have to answer the mail. Are you a sellout? To a point where you question yourself. What is a sellout? A person that literally turns their back on where they come from. I ain't never turned my back on where I came from. Now, I don't.
Last session we talked, you guys brought up something to me, and you said it, trying to think of the term, Oz, I think it was you, said that I had to go back to where I came from to show that I still had my card.
Oh, yeah.
that.
Oh yeah.
And so that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is that because you're black, because you have these authority, and now you have to prove that you're still black, or
yes, and that you still are tied to who you are. I mean, once you take the oath of enlistment to become a soldier, that you have to try more to prove where you come from. But then when you take the code of ethics to become a law enforcement officer or MP or whatever, now it's even more scrutiny. So now you have to find yourself having to remain connected to where you come from. And people think, well, you say those things, never forget where you come from. But you also can't forget where you at. And so, the times you forget where you at, is indicative of you forgetting where you come from. Because sometimes when you get to a position and you forget where you at, just because you successful don't mean you look different. And sometimes people get to a position and they think, I'm here, that I'm looking different. And you have to remind, that's why those words to me, don't forget where you come from and don't forget where you at, is because sometimes when you arrive, you think you were somebody that you're not anymore. Yeah. That's not true. You always gonna be who you are. And so to me that word sellout I've dealt with it before. I still deal with it. You hear people sidebarring or people thinking these things that that because asking themselves, there's no way you can make where you made it without selling out. But not knowing I'm sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Excuse
My
me.
bad.
You and Oz are both active duty now. And you have a different depth into this than Griff and I do because we're retired. And we still get information from the force, but we're not surrounded by it every day. How prevalent is it within the force? How is it being discussed, or is it being overlooked? Oz?
I don't think it's being discussed because when you look at it, the environment that you're in determines when this is prevalent. So when you're at work, you're around a whole bunch of other people like you. Like, we are all like-minded individuals. We may not have the same goal in mind, but we're all moving in the same direction. So it's kind of like everybody's just trying to, make it to the finish line. We all in this fight together. But when you go back to your community, that's when the conversations of sellouts and this, that, and the third is happening. For example, like, and regardless of what color you are, when you go back home, every soldier can say this one thing. When you first come into the military and you start going back home, you try to go visit all of these people, right? You're just spending your time just going and visiting. And then as you get a little bit older, you're like, you know what? This doesn't make sense. I'm going to be at this one location, and if y'all want to come and see me, y'all can come and see me. But that's when those conversations, now look at him, he think he's too good. He got him a halfway decent job, got him a nice little car, then got married and forgot where he came from. And that's where those conversations and stuff come from. And I believe, it is my belief that, what makes me care about your opinion is if I value it. And if you have a negative opinion of me that's not factually based, and I know what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get to a point where I can help out other people in a bigger way than I'm doing now. That's my end point. That's my goal. You can say whatever you want to. Like, I'm not going to sit here and have heartache and grief because you're stuck in an old way of thinking. That's your old way of thinking. And I got it. You haven't been exposed to what I've been exposed to, and I can go, and I'm going to try to bring you along, but everybody can't go with you the way you're trying to go. Sergeant Gerecht, you got something?
No, I'm agreeing with you. I mean, you hit the word that I was going to talk about and say was exposure. I mean, people, I've never, it used to bother me as younger, but as I got a little bit older and a little bit mature, it didn't. And I realized who my real friends were. And I couldn't be upset with the people that considered me to be a sellout because I had to also take in consideration their exposure and what they've been exposed to. You know, I'm 48, getting ready to be 49 years old. I got friends where I come from for 48, 49 years. They live in the same exact place. They haven't been exposed to what I've been exposed to. They haven't seen what I've seen. Now, if I get upset because they call me a sellout, now I'm coming down and not, you know, being arrogant or conceited, but I'm coming down to their level, and I should be better than that at this point. I shouldn't be upset with them. I see it so many times in the military and outside of the military where people's careers are ended because they worry about what other people say and what they think about it. You know, I seen it every cycle. When soldiers come, especially around this time, the holiday exit, well, they call it, they don't call it exodus no more because of religious reasons, holiday block leave. And so the soldiers feel compelled, I'm going back home, and because everybody else doing drugs, I'm doing drugs too. Because if I don't, then I look bad. Or everybody going out partying, and if I don't do it, then I'm going to look bad or whatever. But what I've been blessed with is I also had people in that environment that say, hey, man, you know what? You can't go where we going. Them the ones I found out was my real friends. Because even though they still doing what they doing, they know I have evolved. And that I shouldn't be putting hey, look, you representing us. Now, I done had friends that say, man, hey, bro, I live through you right now. You keep on doing what you, don't you come back here. You don't need to come back here. Even though every time I go home, I do. I just, for me, it keeps me humble. That's the other thing Mark talked about too. Those people, when they get to a certain point, the ones that feel like they ain't from, or well, they not from where they came from, is because they not humble. They done lost their humble spirit. Because at the end of the day, you know what? The way I'm talking right now, I talk the exact same way. The only difference is I changed my go-to. I done had this go-to for 30 years in the Army. And it was people told me that the go-to was I'm not going to get promoted because of the go-to. Didn't stop me. Matter of fact, if you think about it, do they see your teeth when you taking a photo? And they don't even look at DA photos no more. But, you know, I had people that's going to stop me. But what I found out throughout my whole military career, as long as I was true to myself, even in those rooms that some people say I would never be in, as long as I stayed true to myself, I continued to progress, and nobody looked at me as a sellout or anything like that. The ones that did, they just weren't mature enough yet. They haven't been where I've been. And that's, I mean, you said it. When you said exposure, man, I mean, that's it. That's why I look at it. When people use that term sellout, it's because of the lack of education and lack of exposure in my eyes. And I can't fault them because everybody, that's another thing about racism and its system. Everybody ain't exposed to the same educational system. I don't care what nobody say. We can talk Brown versus Board education every day. And I'm telling you right now, all education ain't the same. And that's why some people still stuck in the same mindset.
You know,
Mark, can I say one thing?
Sure.
Yeah, I want to blow out the eyes.
When I go back home, and I go back to where I came from, I use that as encouragement to remind me what I'm made of and the things that I've been through. So when I start feeling sorry for myself, or I feel like woe is me, I go back home, I look at where I came from, and it reminds me of, like, you've been through tougher. What you're going through right now, like I tell people all the time, the Army has been a cakewalk from how I grew up. I've been working since I was 8 years old. Like, the Army has been a cakewalk. So every time I go back home and I see where I came from, it reminds me of what I'm made of and what my potential is. It's not the accomplishments that I've made in the Army. It's where I came from in the beginning, because all those accomplishments that I had from in the Army, that stuff was only made possible because of my beginnings. That's why I always tell people to go back to where you came from so that you can remember what you're made of.
Mark, you got something?
Yes. The one word that I think is very, very critical that we not forget is obligation. Sometimes when people get in positions of authority, there's an indirect call that you're obligated to make sure you take care of your people, right? And Griffin, I know what I'm talking about. This is obligation, this unwritten obligation that if you don't do this, and Mark, you kind of said in the green room, that's what happened. There's this obligation that because of what you look like, there's an obligation for you to support and take care of others who look like you. And a lot of people don't want to admit it. I'm gonna admit it. It happens in the military. It does. And then when you don't do it, you're a sellout. You're for the other team. Even though that your heart is do the right thing, take care of people regardless of their age, gender, ethnicity, doesn't matter. But when you're in a formation and you're not looking out for those that look like you, especially African Americans or black or whatever term you want to use, it's like, well, you know what we're going through. You obviously see there's racial issues. You should sit here and take care of us because you're obligated to. You one of us. That exists so much in our military. It's not even funny. And the problem is that, you know, we sit back here as leaders, and some leaders get caught up in that hot mess. I had a soldier that went to IG on me as a first sergeant because the Sergeant Artie Murphy board in my hallway had all Caucasian white soldiers on it. There was no African Americans, right? None, zero. And the soldier went to IG and said the reason why, you know, he doesn't like his own people, he's racist against blacks because he's not helping other blacks get to where he is. And I had a soldier come to me and it's like, you know, First Sergeant, I thought because I was the second black First Sergeant ever in the history of that company. And he's like, I thought when you got to this company that, you know, the African Americans was going to start thriving because you was the first sergeant and you supposed to look out for our issues. And I looked at that soldier. I was speechless. But the takeaway, and I gave the soldier, what opportunity that you have that I didn't have, and why am I in position? I didn't have what you have in front of you, but I'm at where I'm at. And so why should I use the way I look in order to help you out, in order to make you successful because then I'm acknowledging, you know, and I'm encouraging this foolishness thinking, you know, but it's this in our army. And to me, not enough African Americans are speaking out about it because it exists.
Hey team, just want to say thanks for watching Ask Top, sponsored by MentorMilitary.com. Would greatly appreciate it if you'd reach down, hit the subscribe button, leave us a like. Tell us what you think about today's show or a subject you'd like us to discuss in the future. We'll get right back into the show. Thanks for watching.
Because I've been in combat arms units too. I'm a logistician. I would say that there's some systems in place that, and actually the Army is getting at it right now and trying to identify and adjust it. But systematically within the military, look at who's serving all the combat arms, particular MOSs, and look who's serving all the service and support type of MOSs. Well, so let me ask you, when you was in the combat arms, you was the what? No, not in the combat arms. You couldn't have been. Okay. Man, they would start.
Field artillery is an exception.
Yeah.
Field artillery is the only combat arms that's an exception.
I think they were serving the
No.
Because I'm gonna just be honest, because I know when I was in the CAV and the infantry units I've been in, you know, most of the minorities was in the combat service support elements. Most of the war fighters themselves were of Caucasian. Even with recruiting, if you look at it, I don't know. Some of it could be generational or family saying, "Hey, you don't need to go be combat." I'm just like with Mark. You know, most people say, "Hey, you know, you shouldn't go be an MP." I don't know. Somebody even tried to talk him out of becoming an MP and say that you might want to go be a mechanic or be a supply guy or a girl like that. Because one of the things that I've seen people talk about is we don't have a lot of ethnic leadership in the senior leadership positions because of people not serving in certain jobs. I use Sergeant Major in the Army. Let's use that particular job as an example. How many combat service support or combat or logisticians ever served in that position?
No. There was one. No, there was one. There was a logistician in the 70. It was one. There was one SMA that was a logistician. One.
And just think about it. Who he tied to? Who he was tied to? You got to think about back at a certain point in that position it was all about who you knew. And that's just to be honest. Whereas the system that we have somewhat now is a little bit more, you know, people not just walking, not to say that you don't know people, but you're not just walking into that position. Some of the most qualified people weren't in those seats back in the day. It was more so who they was tied to. But when you look at that in itself, and if you ask me, I look at it as systematically a broken system.
Let's go back to Sergeant Major of the Army for a second.
Okay.
Hey, I'm a little dated. The only African-American SMA I remember was McKinney.
You got two.
Okay.
The current SMA is biracial.
That's right.
So, but again, if you talk to him, it was points in his military. It took a while for that to come out, you know, because he would tell you, I mean.
I saw one of his presentations where he was talking about
when all this stuff came out, because he looked more Caucasian than he do look African-American, he said he would sit in rooms and people would make comments about stuff because they felt comfortable because they didn't know that he was biracial. But before that, you had Sergeant Major McKinney. And then when he got relieved, it really set us, I'm just going to be honest, it set us back. Because again, it was already people that was hesitant saying, hey, you know, it's just like a black quarterback on the football field. For years, it was like, you know, a black person can't be a quarterback. He can be any other position on the field, but to be in the quarterback position, it requires thinking. And we just don't think that he has that thought process. And just think about it. You see more now, but go back to the 60s and 70s, that was unheard of. I can tell you at the University of Alabama, it wasn't happening. Bottom line up front. But it wasn't until Bear Bryant lined up a game playing against USC. USC had a majority of their players was black, and they beat the brakes off Alabama. And then Alabama changed their whole mindset. And it wasn't until under Bear Bryant that they had their first black quarterback too, Walter Lewis back in the day. But that's a whole nother story. Some of these systems have been designed, honestly, getting back to your question is that it's some of the systems that we have in place, I think, is the reason why it's some institutional racism, but people don't really see it as that. But I just think the way the system is set up, that certain jobs would never be a certain person that looked like a certain way or whatever.
So you're saying that majority of combat arms, I know in special ops, the majority of them are Caucasian.
Infantry?
But I wasn't aware of the infantry. I know in the field artillery, like I said, I was the only white guy in my unit. Wow. Across the entire battalion, we were a minority. But I will say that changed over the next 18 months. We became a little bit more diverse within the organization. But I'll never forget the comment that was made to me in my first PT formation in a low whisper. You're the only one. You're the onlyest one.
I've been that guy.
And Oz, you were going to say something about field artillery being different?
No, I'm saying like field artillery is like an exception. Like they're mixed up pretty well, but like the rest of the combat arms, we're minorities. And the 4th Sergeant Major of the Army was the logistician.
Yeah. I was trying to look that up.
Who was it? And Google is some serious.
Who was it?
Wikipedia. Leon
Van
Yep.
Van Autry.
1973 to 1975.
Yeah.
All right.
We're in the same situation right now. You know, now that they open up jobs to females basically across the board, it's going to be a while before the formation start looking as diverse as we want to see it. Because the other thing is trying to get, you know, certain particular cultures and groups to go to certain jobs. Like, you know,
that's a challenge in special ops.
They
try hard to recruit in a diverse way, but it's, you know, for some reason, some ethnic groups just choose not to do that, or only in small quantities.
Some of it is stigma. Some of it is that, you know what, if I go there, one, I'm a sellout.
Really?
One. And some of it is that, hey, based off other people's experience, might not be what I want, because I'm a probably be facing an uphill battle because of who I am and what I look like. And
I never thought about it that way. You have given me some food for thought. Never thought about it that way. Hey, Hurricane, tell me about the systemic racism or institutionalized racism within the military from your perspective.
You know, this, you know, you if you look at, you know, systematic versus institutional, you know, systematic, you know, it's systematic is a little bit far-fetched in the military, not institutional, but systematic, you know, because some of the processes that exist today, it's kind of hard. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but it's kind of hard. But institutional is created by people. Systematic is created by people as well, but it's things that are processes that run themselves. But see, institutional racism is where people come through and they create these norms and establish with these organizations. And with that comes, you know, established customs, things that we do here, things that you can't do here. This is what we believe.
Can you give me an example of one?
So yeah,
anybody.
I'll give you this. So there was this. I don't golf, right? I don't golf. And
I swing, but I don't golf.
And I was a first sergeant. The second company I had, you know, the regimental / brigade sergeant major, you know, had selected people that he would go hunting. It was twofold. So he would ask certain people, "Hey, I'm going hunting this weekend. Hey, First Sergeant X, First Sergeant Y, and First Sergeant M, you want to go hunt with me?" Never ask First Sergeant H, right? Because the assumption is I don't hunt because I'm black, right? You know, not even asking the fact that maybe I want to participate, to hang out and socialize, but just because of what I look like, that the assumption is I don't hunt. And so by process of elimination, I'm not going to ask him, you know. Then or same thing with golfing, you know, and I started to see a pattern. I was like, but, you know, I asked myself, well, why can't he ask me? You know, if I wanted to go, I could say no, I won't go golf. But the process of not asking me
the exclusion.
Is a stigma. It's exclusion. And to me, that's a part of the institutional racism. You may not be perfect, but you are thinking in the back of your head, because the color of your skin, you're not going to want to participate in this activity, so I'm not going to ask you. But the effects from your lack of asking is more consequential than asking me. And so to me, that's where a lot of leaders, you know, they kind of overlook. By not asking a person a question, not necessarily you have intent to be racist, but you're excluding that person by not asking them because you're assuming that they don't do something that you want to do. That is a deep thing in our military, and that's just an example I'll give.
And that would be I would look at that in two different perspectives. One, I see it exactly from where you're coming from. Then I also see it from I don't want to say an uneducated perspective, but a lack of sensitivity perspective, where maybe I'm that white leader and I'm saying, hey, so-and-so, you want to go shooting today? You want to go da-da-da-da? And I'm making an assumption that Halliburton don't hunt. Not that I'm racist, but I'm excluding you because I've made some assumptions that aren't based in fact. But my assumptions have far-reaching consequences other than Halliburton don't hunt. And I mean, I think that goes across all ethnic groups, but I can very easily see how that becomes something that a minority can look at and say, why me? Why not me?
I will say this. As a minority, a lot of times we do the exact same thing too. We have a tendency to exclude and assume, you know, Mark don't play dominoes. I ain't gonna invite him over to the house to play dominoes because that's what the brother's gonna be doing or whatever. And I just think as a leader, period, you can't have that mindset.
It's funny you say that.
Because it happened to you.
We had an ammo site up in Germany, and at lunchtime, they would get together and play dominoes. I would always sit there and watch. And, you know, nobody asked me if I wanted to play. And one of the black sergeant first classes one day said, "You know how to play dominoes?" And I went, "Yeah, I've been watching you guys long enough. You think you can play?" "I don't know. Are you going to let me play with the brothers? Because I'll play if you let me." And so after that, I was allowed to play dominoes.
You know, it like you say, it wasn't intentional.
No, it wasn't.
It's just a fact. And I'm gonna be honest, guess who taught me how to play domino?
Who?
I was in the motor pool where I was the only black guy in the motor pool. And guess what they did every lunch, during lunch, and on breaks, because I also had civilians when I was there 4 Lindenwood. They played dominoes. So it wasn't people that looked like me that taught me how to play dominoes. Now, I improved by getting around people that look like me. Because within dominoes, it requires a you know, you got a certain talk as well, some things you have to say and read. But
you have to slam some bones.
Yeah, but that's why I learned how to play with those guys. But again, it's because of making those assumptions. And I think as you mature as a leader, it should, and I don't like to live in the world of should, but as you mature as a leader, that stuff should start, going away. I mean, every organization I've been in, regardless if I knew that you didn't want to do it, I know what perception is like, and I still ask. At the end of the day, I still ask, so that if it ever came back and said, well, you know what, Sergeant Major Griffin, he didn't even act, oh yeah, he did. If I had people at my house, if I had my first sons or my platoon sons at my house, you better believe all of them were invited.
Everybody gets
who's
invited.
Not to come, that's not on me. But if anybody ever came back and say, well, he just invited such and such. Now, I never wanted that perception right there.
I think the big issue here is, as people, not even as leaders, as people, we make assumptions that are not always challenged by others. Mm-hmm. And by not being challenged, we can't grow. Because you can come to me and say, hey, Gerecht, I feel like you weren't inviting me to the golf game or something. What's up with that? Well, dude, I didn't think you played golf. Well, okay. Well, what if I didn't? Why didn't you ask? I mean, it's just basic human nature that there's some things that should be rather obvious to me, especially in my relationship with my wife, that I just don't see. But she sees very clearly and lets me know. So, we've been together 43 years. So I assume as a leader at work, there's things I miss and that I don't need to be challenged outright on, but I need to be questioned about in a way that says, hey, dumbass, think about what you're doing. And I think we all have blind spots. And the only way we overcome those blind spots is by people. Challenge may be a strong word, but I like the word challenge. They say, hey, are you aware?
I wouldn't say challenge, but again, if somebody going to come talk to you about your blind spots, have you made yourself approachable and accessible?
Yes.
That's the problem. A lot of times people don't want to come and talk to you about it because they already know what the response they're going to get. You're going to probably make some type of excuse or the problem got to be me. It can't be why you coming at me? Because I know I'm doing what I'm doing right. I wouldn't have made it to where I'm at right now if I didn't know everything. So you need to go check yourself. And so a lot of times leaders that don't acknowledge that they have blind spots and don't make themselves accessible and approachable, they end up on the front of Army time.
Well,
I'm glad, Mark. One thing I want to add on to Griff what he said is blind spots can be the difference between social bonding and fraternization, because not inviting one person to a social event could be deemed as fraternization, because you didn't include everybody. And so now what you looked at for team building is now can be looked at for fraternization. But that's a blind spot because you assume that person didn't want to go. But now the person that you assume didn't want to go looks at it as you fraternizing with other people. And so to me, that's why it's very, very important as a leader that you truly have to sit back and look at everything in all aspects.
Well, one of the things when we talk about blind spots and being approachable, I thought I was an approachable guy. I know that you guys see me as a kind, lovable, easygoing guy, but believe it or not, I've got a pretty aggressive and outgoing personality. And I did not realize how many people I turned off with that people felt like they couldn't come talk to me. But yet, when a soldier in the unit came one day and talked to me, and then the word leaked out that, hey, he sat down and he listened and he helped, and it was like, holy God, are you talking about the first sergeant? Because obviously that's not him. And I didn't realize that, man. And I had to really back up and do a self-assessment as to why did they think I wasn't approachable? Because I got a big heart. You blowing me a kiss? Mark, I thought you were blowing me a kiss.
Oh, no, I was getting something off.
Oz, jump in, brother. Oz.
So what I think what people don't realize, like when we talk about awareness and blind spots, is that the reason that we have blind spots is because when we judge ourselves off of our intentions. When other people judge us, they judge us off of our actions. So
Touche.
Your actions versus your intentions is two different things. So back to the whole, like Sergeant Major Griffin was saying with, one person, us doing the same thing, because our brain is a prediction machine. It predicts what's going to happen in the future. Like Colin Powell even said that when he was in charge, he would get 40% of the information. Once they gave him the 40%, then he would use the rest of his experience to fill the rest of the gaps. So leaders at all levels do that all the time. Like, we're not very good in the beginning when we first started doing it, but we get better over time. But sometimes that comes back to shoot us in the foot by using our experiences, because our experiences may not have been the best, or it may not have put us in a position to be successful in every situation. But by using that experience to fill the gap instead of just asking that question, we're creating a situation that didn't even have to be created.
And Mark, if you allow me to jump in right fast. So a lot of times, and I had to find it out myself, as much as you say we have good hearts, I know I have a good heart or whatever, but again, what Oz just said, I was mimicking what I seen some of my leaders did in the past. How they walked around mad. You look at their command photo, they look like they the most angry person in the world. And it was funny that we having this conversation because one of my former soldiers just sent me two command photos he just took. And one of them is smiling, and another one is he's looking like he ready to shoot somebody. And I told him, I said, put the smiling photo up there. I said, but Sergeant Major, I said, so here's the thing. You'd be surprised. A lot of times we've been taught that, if we act kind or whatever, they just show it's a sign of weakness or whatever. But I would tell you that by you putting that photo, just that photo alone up there, with you having somewhat of a smile on your face, you just open the door for a lot of your soldiers to say, you know what, I can go talk to First Sergeant. I can bring issues and he's going to listen to me.
But you're breaking the mold there, man, because nobody does it that way, right?
That was an institutional norm is that, hey, your photos, officers smile on their photos and sergeant majors look mean, the first sergeants look mean on their photos.
And if you're a sergeant major, you got to be a screaming lunatic.
But where's that? Where's that written? I think when I came to the academy and I talked to Mark and them, I said, you know what? That Mark group of sergeant majors that came out of the academy, they some of the smartest sergeant majors that ever come out of that academy because of what they receive at the school. And I said, look, you don't have to go and be that guy or girl that's worrying about grass. If that's, I mean, at this point, as a senior leader in the Army and your focus is just worrying about whether or not people walk on grass or not, I mean, we done missed the boat. All the stuff that we did talk, your curriculum is online on what they teach in majors and ILE, which means that you are more added value to your boss than you ever been in the history of sergeant majors.
Absolutely.
So what you should be doing is being that sounding board or whatever. You don't have to be mad. You don't have to be the one that's out there, hitting your chest and all this other stuff. I mean, that's what we saw. That's what I saw growing up. I seen a lot of senior non-commissioned officers. All they did was hit their chest and want me to think they were Superman, but they never really showed me they were Superman. They just talked about being Superman or Superwoman.
When I do mentoring through Ask Top and Mentor Military, and people come to me and tell me how bad their leaders are, and here are the things their leaders are doing. And I think back and I go, gee, that was me. And the reason why I did that was because my leaders did it to me, and my leaders wouldn't do anything to me that they weren't allowed to do because they were doing the right thing. Oh, whoops. Maybe what I was doing was hazing. Maybe what I was doing wasn't corrective training, but punishment. And I think all of us, as we come up, we emulate what we saw until we know better or someone teaches us.
Know better, you do better.
So I know that I made a lot of mistakes.
It's just like your parents beating your fourth point of contact with an extension cord, right? Some people, they brag about it. This is what happened to me. Doesn't take the fact that they still their mother and their father, but they embrace that as a sign of a rites of passage.
Right.
But the law says something different. The law said that's abuse, right? And you say, well, look where I am. I've made it. And so you can't, and so it's inconsequential. You can't say, well, I made it, so the law is not right. It's still the law. Right. And so you gotta look at the perspective as, yeah, that's your parents or your mother. Yeah, I got whipped with an extension cord or a racing car track. Doesn't necessarily make it right because I became successful. Just because I go 100 miles an hour and get to my destination without causing an accident doesn't mean I didn't break the law. Yeah.
Well, I think what you guys have done in your career, what leaders are out there doing now, is fundamentally changing our soldiers and our leaders, because these guys are getting smarter about a lot of things. They're combat effective. They are proven leaders in a lot of ways. And it's up to, I include the retirement community that are actively involved in educating and mentoring, that we have a responsibility, duty, obligation to say, hey, there's better ways. And oh, by the way, you may not realize what you're doing is wrong, but let somebody hem you up for it, and you might find out how wrong it is, and you might not be able to recover. We're getting ready to wrap up. Does anybody have any parting shots?
Man, I'm telling you, Mark, I love this, man. It's just sitting here and just having this dialogue with y'all guys and just talking about some of this stuff. I think it's truly important. I think I'm glad you put it together because I know that it's needed, and I'm just looking forward to the next session.
I appreciate that, man. I'm getting a lot out of this too. I'm just hoping the people that see it are getting something out of it, because it's got to happen in the force. Leaders and soldiers got to come together.
It's happening. This is what I was saying. I'm not on active duty, but I still got a lot of soldiers. It's happening. Matter of fact, it's happening a whole lot better now than it was when we was on. And then with platforms like what Mark had with freestyle, you got the professional SGL out there that he has his platform. That's the beautiful thing about, and your platform, soldiers getting a whole lot more now than we ever did.
But years ago, they would not have encouraged this. The military would not. They'd have said, like freestyle, they'd be like, hey, you guys don't need to be doing that.
Hey, it's people still doing that, Mark.
It's people that still say it, but unfortunately, those are dinosaurs. I'm just gonna be honest. When the SEAC, you got the SEAC that's on these shows, that means that he, again, and I got a interview here at a podcast I'm doing at 1300, and we talking about mentorship. Look, one of the books I always give to people is Who Moved My Cheese. The problem is a lot of people just do not want to move their cheese. They are so set in their ways, and then they want to know why they didn't got left behind. This is the future. This is. Matter of fact, I was looking at, they was talking about the Comedy House in California. Most of the comedians now, they not doing stand-up. They doing podcasts. That's where the money is at. And if I hate to say it, if you don't evolve, you're going to be like that small mom and pop store, and Walmart going to come right in your area, and they going to sell what you selling, Plus they selling soups and renting cars and got McDonald's, and they're just gonna move you out the way. The people that said, I say thank you for telling me that I shouldn't, because I have been told, Griff, you need to leave some of these things alone. Thank you, I appreciate it. You know, and
I was told by my marketing director to leave this racism conversation alone. And I said, I'm sorry. She goes, you know, it might get you kicked off of Facebook. You don't know how it'll go. And I said, well, it's a topic I believe in that needs to be talked about. And if it gets me thrown off of Facebook, it gets me thrown off of Facebook. But there are people that are naysayers, and it wasn't because we were going to talk about something that was bad. It was because we would talk about something that potentially would be perceived in a way that was bad or inappropriate.
Oh, it was going to make some people feel bad.
Or feel uneasy.
Yeah.
And, you know, when we talk about sellout real quick, I'm sure, you know, I'm getting some feedback occasionally as the white guy sponsoring the racism panel. Why? Why not? We're a team. We're brothers and sisters. And if there's nothing else I felt while I was in the service was, I don't care if I didn't like you personally, I would stand beside you night and day, hell or high water, and defend you and expect you to defend me. Racism's got no place in the military, in society. That's just it. And the people that think otherwise, they've got some serious issues. And Oz, I'm getting ready to wrap up. What you got?
No, I'm glad to be here and be able to share in a part of this, because like you said, this is it's a much needed conversation, because we'll never be able to move forward if people aren't willing to respect people's opinions and hear how they feel and what they value. Because if we don't have these conversations, things are going to stay the same. We're going to stay stuck in the mud right where we're at, and we're never going to get moving. So I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of this panel.
There's no allowing, brother. This is all, if we could bring some more folks in, you guys are freaking awesome. I respect you as leaders, everything that you have accomplished, the fact that you're reaching out and mentoring people. We didn't have that growing up, where people reached out and down to us and said, hey, I'm here if you need me. We didn't have that. We had informal mentorship where we would look up to somebody and emulate them, but it was very rare that somebody would pull you aside and say, hey, you want to put some time away once a month or something and just talk? You guys are doing that every day. Not only are you doing that, but you're doing that in your show too. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Part 3 is coming. I think I've already sent out the invite for it. And it's going to be racism and potential solutions, because we've defined it. We've talked about what it is. Now we got to figure out how to translate that talk into action, because talk and feeling good's okay. But if we don't do anything about it, why did we have the talk? To feel good? And I really think that's going to be the hard part of this conversation, because solutions are hard in this conversation, because people see things from different perspectives. What you see as an issue, I may not see as an issue. The ideal is that we have to come together, be open-minded, be willing to disagree, but be willing to find common ground. So I love you guys. I really appreciate it. I look forward to the next meeting. And I plan on having each of you on Mentor Military in the future on separate subjects. Okay. So I see the scowl coming from Halliburton.
I know. I want to add one thing.
Sure.
And just something to think on. That's a good segue to our next session. How do you know how deep the water is unless someone goes out and measures it? You don't know how deep it is. The only way you can figure out how deep the water is someone has to be they have to go measure it. And And how am I relating that to how do we know how deep what we're in right now? Someone has to do it. And this is what we're doing. We're measuring how deep it is. And could it be a casualty? Possibly. Could it not be? Someone has to measure it. And I kind of want to use that as a segue into our third session.
Okay. And you know something, guys? It's kind of, excuse me here, I apologize. It's kind of serendipitous that you guys brought me on freestyle. I didn't know you guys from Adam. And you made me feel welcome. We hit it off. And I just had huge respect for you guys. And the fact that I felt comfortable enough for people that I really didn't know to say, hey, will you come on a panel? To me, that speaks volume of who you guys are as people, leaders, soldiers, and members of our society. Because we have a duty, responsibility, and obligation to help shape, grow, mentor, and mold our country's most precious resource, and that's the sons and daughters of this great nation. So I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. So if you guys are ready, we're going to go ahead and sign off. Until next time, everybody, stay safe, stay healthy, and make sure you tune in for round 3 coming up in a couple of weeks. Take care.